Reuters.
Now throw in surging food prices and rampant biofuel production with rapidly growing demand for meat in Asia, and you have the makings of an emerging global food crisis, with the UN expecting the world population to go from more than 6.5 billion to 9 billion people by just 2050. Many are starting to think the unthinkable. Could the world run out of food? That's why here at Reuters we're running an in-depth focus with tech stories, video and pictures on what the experts are calling agflation. Around the world, the social impact, sometimes with fatal consequences, is increasingly apparent. On the streets of Cairo, long queues for bread are a common sight. Violence has also broken out as Egyptians struggle to avoid losing out on limited supplies of subsidised bread. There were similar problems in the Middle Eastern country of Yemen. Food shortages and increasing demand during the holy month of Ramadan sent prices sharply higher. In desperation, many Yemenis were forced to turn to charities to feed themselves. Matters in Yemen and elsewhere haven't been helped either by the crashing US dollar, which has merely served to push up dollar-denominated commodities like wheat. Earlier this year, there were riots in Cameroon. Several people were killed during disturbances triggered by anger over the cost of basic foodstuffs. Elsewhere, there have been street protests in Mexico where locals have found it difficult to pay for food staples like tortillas because of huge hikes in the cost of corn. And food-loving Italians have felt the financial pinch too. Prices of pasta have soared, partly because of the growing use of durum wheat for biofuels. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Reuters Global Commodities and Energy Editor Richard Mabley. Richard, thanks for joining us. Now, this problem seems to have erupted very quickly indeed. What are the root causes here?
Well, the seeds for what we're seeing now are really sown at the beginning of the decade as China's economy started to grow very fast. China has to import a lot of oil, and the first commodity that was really affected by rising Chinese demand was oil. Now, oil is used to grow a lot of crops. Chinese demand for food is rising quickly as well. The combination of the two has had a big impact on the world commodity markets, which really set the price of food in the end. Investors have decided that commodities are a good bet. They're buying into the oil markets, they're buying into the grains markets. And when you buy a Microsoft share or you buy a US government bond, it doesn't necessarily have an impact on ordinary people. If you buy a contract for oil or a contract for grains on the Chicago exchanges, it really does have an impact in the end on the way people live, and that's what we're beginning to see now. There are lots of reasons for the rising price of food. Biofuels to help combat climate change is one, but I think this combination of growing Chinese demand and investor strategy are the two main features.
So, overall, it's clearly a global phenomenon, but when it comes to countries that are really feeling the effects socially, we're talking about the developing world.
That's right. In this Reuters package, we'll report from places like Peru, places like Cameroon, where there really are social stresses beginning to show up now. We'll also report from the Middle East, from the haves, the oil-producing countries, and the have-nots, countries that don't produce oil in the Middle East, like Lebanon, which are really beginning to suffer the consequences now and can't use oil revenues to cover higher food costs.
And also, we'll be looking at, Richard, some of the potential solutions that are being looked at by government and policymakers.
That's right. Policymakers are already in developing nations increasing subsidies and bringing in price controls. But we've seen from previous crises that that can exacerbate the problem by bottling it up. So we'll look at other options available, like food stamps. We'll look in Europe at the way consumers are reacting. Perhaps there may be a change in the view of genetically modified foods. There's a lot of opposition in Europe to GM foods, and if the price of food goes up, we may see that change. Out of the US, we'll look at a possible change in trading patterns. Demand for biofuels made from corn in the US is going through the roof. It may be that the US considers dropping tariffs to import more Brazilian sugar, ethanol, to ease demand on biofuels.
Okay, Richard, fascinating stuff. And as Richard was saying, lots more to come over the next couple of weeks on Reuters.com. But for now, thanks for watching.